friends, welcome back. Today we are going to explore Renfro Valley and the Kentucky Hall of Fame Music Museum. I'm here with my new friend, Avery Bradshaw.
Hello.
And he's going to share a lot of neat things with us about, first, Renfro Valley. What can you tell us about Renfro Valley, Avery?
Well, Renfro Valley was started in 1939 by Mr. John Laird, who was a radio man from Chicago, and he had a dream to bring music back to this little valley in an old-time way. And so in November of 1939, on November the 2nd, he started the first Renfro Valley Barn Dance, which was a variety show, and it featured entertainers from all over the area, mostly local, and they would play music in the old-time way and dress up as they used to do. And so it was a lot of fun for the community, and Renfro Valley evolved over the years, being featured on CBS radio and WLW radio, and heard all around the world and known by people from far and wide, much wider than Renfro Valley itself.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
All right, where else can we go?
So next, let's go back and learn a little bit about Mr. John Laird, the founder of Renfro Valley, and learn about how this valley and all the music got its start.
All right, friends, come on, let's go.
We are here in John Laird's exhibit in the Renfro Valley room at the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame and Museum. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to you about John Laird. He was the founder of Renfro Valley. And in John Laird's early years, he joined the military service and was traveling around. He was also a cartoonist for a long time, and we'll get you a picture of his work doing cartoons as well. But he always had a passion for the old-time music and old-time way of life. And John Laird started on radio in Chicago in the early 30s, and from there he kind of conceived the notion of the Renfro Valley Barn Dance. And so up in Chicago they started what was called the Renfro Valley Barn Dance, and it was just a radio show. And back in '37 he decided, I want to take this show to a real place and make it in a real barn as it's portrayed on the radio. And so that's how Renfro Valley was born. Of course, we've already talked about how they started in 1939 on November the 2nd, and that was the first Renfro Valley Barn Dance. John Laird owned Renfro Valley up until the 80s, when the last time that he was on stage was in 1985. He hosted all of the shows, wrote all of the scripts, and actually wrote most of the songs that they sang on the shows themselves. He created, of course, the Barn Dance, another show called the Sunday Morning Gathering, which was very famous and is actually still played on radio all around North America today. And so John Laird had a huge hand in shaping so many people's careers, all the way from Red Foley to Loretta Lynn to Merle Travis played on the stage over there at Renfro Valley. And so many people got their start with Mr. Laird, and he gave them that start to go. As I was saying earlier, Mr. Laird was a musician and a songwriter himself. He wrote lots and lots of songs, Take Me Back to Renfro Valley, and all kinds of songs that they sang on the shows over there. And he actually wrote most of those on this typewriter right here in his exhibit case that you can see. And he was old-fashioned, and so he always kind of went with the old ways of doing things. That was his vision, and so he filled the valley with things that would make people think about the old ways of growing up and the pioneer life of coming to Kentucky and all kinds of things like that. And so that's a little bit of history about Mr. Laird. Of course, he was born right here in Rockcastle County, Kentucky, before he left to get his career started in Chicago and ultimately came back. So we hope you're enjoying the tour so far, and we'll see you on the next stop. And here we are at Red Foley's exhibit here in the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. Some of you may know Red Foley because your middle school is named after him, Foley School up there in Berea, Kentucky. And Red Foley was an outstanding vocal talent in country, gospel, and pop music. And Foley was one of the most versatile performers of all time. One of several Kentucky musicians recruited by John Layer, he was a star of the WLS barn dance in the 1930s, a Grand Ole Opry headliner in the 1940s, and also had his own network television show, Avalon Time, with comedian Red Skeleton. In the 1950s, he hosted the Ozark Jubilee and helped many young performers to get their start. He recorded such huge hits as Old Shep and Smoke on the Water, which topped the charts for 13 weeks in 1944. A string of hits followed, including Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy, Birmingham Bounce, Midnight, Goodnight Irene, One by One, and many others. But it was a gospel singer that Red Foley really made his mark being. In 1951, he recorded Peace in the Valley, which was the first gospel recording to sell 1 million copies. And he was the #1 sacred song performer for 5 consecutive years on the charts. Hey kids, welcome back to the Renfro Valley room here at the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame and Museum. I wanted to talk to you just a minute about some of the different things that you would see on the barn dance that John Layer kind of founded. And so this first dress that we're looking at right here belonged to Lily Mae Ledford, and she was a founding member of the Coon Creek Girls. And the Coon Creek Girls were a group that John Layer kind of conceived in his mind, and they went on to have really good success. They played for the President of the United States, also for the Queen of England. They went all the way over there, and so we have one of their dresses right here. This one belonged to Lily Mae Ledford, and she was the banjo player in the group, very talented lady. And this is kind of some of the dress that you would see on the barn dance. As I've said earlier, it's a more old-time style of music, and so they dress the part. And really interesting to see some of the different costumes that they would have over the years there on the Renfro Valley barn dance, as well as the Sunday morning gathering. If we move on down the line right here, we have Red Turner, a couple of his instruments. And this guitar is a really special one. This is a 1945 Martin D18 guitar that was gifted to the museum. This is what that he played on the barn dance and the Midwestern Hayride show that he was on as well. And so lots of history there. That was a really special guitar, and our museum is so glad to have that one. And moving on a little bit more of the dress that we were talking about, this is Old Joe Clark. And he probably has one of the most signature styles of any entertainer that came out of Renfro Valley. As you can see, his vest right there, he collected pins that fans would give him from all over the world. And it's really interesting because we have had 3 or 4 people come through the museum that gave him a pin back in the 70s, 60s, or whatever, and they found it on his vest right there. And so there's a lot of history and a lot of stories that go along with each one of those. As you can see, his hat is pretty well worn out and tattered from use over the years, but he liked that. That was part of his persona that he portrayed. And he always played banjo in the clawhammer style, which was the older style of banjo playing, a little bit more primitive than what most people do today with the banjo. And you can see his boots down there at the bottom. And they have actually erected a statue in front of the old barn in the valley itself that's dedicated to Old Joe Clark. It's a picture or a statue of him. And so anyway, that's a little bit of history about how they used to dress in the valley. Just a little history about a piece that we have here in the museum that's special to all of us. This quilt was from 1947, and all the entertainers that year who performed on the Renfro Valley Barn Dance and Gathering signed this quilt. and they embroidered over their signatures. And so it's a really nice piece of history that we have about Renfro Valley, and we're so thankful to have it. One signature in particular that I wanted to show you was Mr. John Layer's up here at the top. He had a little bit of a sense of humor, and he signed his "The Boss." And so we're so thankful to have this piece of history, and it really does tell a story about the old ways that were preserved at Renfro Valley with quilt making and all kinds of different crafts that they did back in the day. We're here on our front porch exhibit, and this exhibit gives people an idea about how people used to be able to get together and play music all the time. Now, back in the day, before iPods and all that good stuff and YouTube, the only entertainment was to get together with your families and friends and neighbors and to play music on the porch or sing and all kinds of things like that. Kids would play in the yard. So this depicts that era of time back in the 1800s, long before there was radio or even television. And so families would come from far and wide, walk or ride horses and bring their instruments with them, and they'd all get together on the porch and play. And that's how so much of the good Appalachian music really came to fruition, was right here on a front porch just like this. Howdy folks, and welcome to Renfro Valley. And that's the line that John Layer used to sign on to the radio each time they broadcast from the old barn in Renfro Valley, Kentucky. And we want to take you on a little bit of tour right now about some of the things that we have that show you how exactly they got that signal from Renfro Valley all the way up to Louisville and Chicago and Michigan and all kinds of different places. So if we look over here in the exhibit, we have mainly some of the things that were used to do so. The first thing being what you saw me talking into was a microphone. That's where the signal is started, and that's how they captured all those entertainers so long ago. And they would go from there into a transmitter like this big tall one sitting here, and this is a recreation of the one in Renfro Valley with a few original parts as well. And so they would transmit that signal all over the country, and it would be picked up by larger radio stations that would then up the power and get it out to even more people. And so many things that they did back then are different from the way that we do them now. Signals nowadays are sent over the internet, but this is kind of where it started, and how that they managed to get those signals all the way up to the big cities from the foothills of Appalachia here in Kentucky. This right here, this is a radio that would be fairly common to see in a home back in the day. This is a little bit more of a fancier model, but back then they didn't even have FM radio. There was no such thing at that time. So this is an AM only radio, and it would pick up just about anything that you can imagine from probably here to Cincinnati, as long as the signal was hot enough. And so anyway, you'd see some things like this in homes. And if we look over here, we're going to see a few more examples of what would be common to see in a home. This is the predecessor to a what would be known as a record player, and I'll show you one of the records that it would play. And this is actually from a Kentucky native, Doc Hopkins, and a record called John Henry with the song John Henry on it. So this is what a Victrola would play, and this big thing right here is a Victrola, what's called an Edison Victrola, and it would there's a needle right there on the brass piece that reads the grooves in this record, and that's what makes the sound. And that was the about the first record player that come out, and these are a lot thicker than normal records that you'll see today, but of course the same concept as we have now. A little bit more of an example of what you're going to see that would have been normal in a household back then. We have a radio right up here on a bookshelf, and this was more common. This was what everybody would have had. And back in the day, the only form of entertainment before television when radio came along was the radio. And so families would gather around their living room on a Saturday night to listen to the Renfro Valley Barn Dance or to listen to the Grand Ole Opry. And this was a depiction of what that setup would look like. And we do have a couple of little sound blurbs if you'd like to bring the camera in, and we can get a little listen as to what we would have heard back in the 30s and 40s coming out of radio. So if we click on the button right here, we're going to hear a little bit of WHAS, and that was a really big station here in Kentucky in Louisville that broadcasted the barn dance as well as the Grand Ole Opry and different programs like that. So let's give that a listen. So that's a little bit about how radio got its start and how people used to listen and how they used to transmit those signals all around the country. And we'll see you on the next stop. Welcome back to the tour here at the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. We have a really good depiction of what a modern bluegrass band might consist of. And this takes you through all the different instruments that you're going to see in a bluegrass group nowadays. And we'll get started down here on the end with the guitar. And this is going to depict the rhythm that you're going to hear in a bluegrass band. And then we'll move on to the mandolin. And next we have the dobro, or known as the resonator guitar. And next we have the fiddle. Last but not least, the banjo. So all these instruments combined make what is known as the bluegrass band, the modern bluegrass band. They fill all the different tones that you need for a band. I'd like to take this time to tell you a little bit about Merle Travis and one of his special guitars that we have here in the museum. Merle Travis was known for his famous thumb style of guitar playing, which also had the bass notes as well as lead notes that he would play at the same time. It almost sounded like two people playing the guitar at once, and so he kind of coined that style, which later went into Chet Atkins style. But he had a lot of songs. Probably his most notable song is 16 Tongues that he made famous. And I'll tell you a little bit about this guitar that we have. This is a custom Gibson Super 400. It is the most valuable piece that we have here in the museum. And it has a lot of history. This particular guitar has his name engraved in pearl in the neck. And a lot of people thought that that was just an aesthetic thing, but actually they did that because of the early days in television. They didn't have the ability to put people's names on the screen while they were singing. And so if somebody tuned in late, they wouldn't know who was playing. So they put their names in their guitar necks, and it kind of served a double purpose. Also, one really interesting thing about this particular guitar is there's a little bracket that runs parallel with the side of the guitar neck. And Merle Travis was always concerned about the time. And back then, you had to be right on time to be in television, and your songs had to end in a certain amount of minutes and seconds. And he always hated looking at his watch because he felt like it was disrespectful to the audience. So he put that bracket on his guitar and mounted a pocket watch to it so he could check the time without the audience ever even knowing. And so that's a couple of interesting things about this particular guitar. We're so thankful to have this one, and it's definitely one of the highlights in our museum. I want to talk to you for just a minute about the founder of bluegrass music, also known as the father of bluegrass music, Mr. Bill Monroe, from right here in Kentucky, his home place being in Rosine. Bill Monroe kind of coined what is known as modern bluegrass today with that driving three-finger banjo style, as well as the rhythmic mandolin playing that he did himself in his band. He took what would be known as Appalachian mountain music and gave it his own twist, and that's what we know pretty much as bluegrass today. Everything that you're going to hear on modern bluegrass radio is based around what he did, and he traveled all around the country for years and years, and so many people got their start with Mr. Monroe, notably String Bean, Earl Scruggs, and so many people that he really helped get a start in the business. And we'll tell you a little bit about how they used to travel in the next stop, so you all stay tuned for that. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about how musicians used to travel. And by today's standards, you probably wouldn't think that what is behind me is a tour bus, but back in the 30s and 40s, this is what they had. This is a 1931 produce wagon that was used to transport musicians and instruments all around the country, going to radio stations and going to shows. So before we had the modern airplanes and tour buses that are very luxurious today, this is what everybody traveled around in. And as you can see, they would put their instruments in the back of the truck, and there would be probably a couple people back there as well riding along and holding them steady. And they would make their way around the country in a car just like this. And there's a lot to be said about musicians back then versus now, because back in the day when they had to travel like this, it was a really uncomfortable experience for just about everybody. And so there was a lot of dedication back then to their craft and trying to get their music out. There was a lot more effort put in back then, because by today's standards, you can get famous overnight on YouTube. But back in the day, you had to go to several hundred radio stations and beg people to even play your music. And so it's a lot different, but that shows you the dedication that some of these people had to their craft and to getting their music all around the world. Back in the day when they had to travel like this, it was a really uncomfortable experience for just about everybody. And so there was a lot of dedication back then to their craft and trying to get their music out. There was a lot more effort put in back then, because by today's standards, you can get famous overnight on YouTube. But back in the day, you had to go to several hundred radio stations and beg people to even play your music. And so it's a lot different, but that shows you the dedication that some of these people had to their craft and to getting their music all around the world. If we go on over to here, we're going to see Bill Monroe and some of the different things that he has done through the years. You'll see a depiction of his band right here. I mentioned earlier Mr. Earl Scruggs, and he's standing there in the middle. And this tells us a little bit about what they did in the early days. And Bill Monroe's first hit record was What Will You Give in Exchange for Your Soul, the gospel album. And they followed that up with a string of hits that have been all the way back. They've become standards now, and All the Good Times Are Past and Gone, New River Train, and Rollin' My Sweet Baby's Arms. And so that tells you a little bit about how they used to travel, what songs they did, and how they got their music on out to the radio stations as well. And this tells us a little bit about how Bill Monroe got his music. And while Bill Monroe didn't exactly invent music from scratch, he was the hand that shaped the sound that we recognize as bluegrass music today. Since then, other musicians have come along to add something of their own to make it all brand new again. I wanted to take a little time to tell you about the queen of country music, Miss Loretta Lynn. And Loretta Lynn is famously from Butcher Holler, to which she has wrote several songs about being from there. And what a beautiful voice that she has had over the years, and one of the first women to see a lot of success in country music. And she has had so many hits. Coal Miner's Daughter, Honky Tonk Girl, You're Looking at Country, and she's still out there making music today as well. And we have one of her dresses here that's very special to our museum. This is one of the best pieces that we have that she gifted to our museum, and we're so thankful to have that. And here we have two of our 2015 inductees that you might be a little bit more familiar with. Kevin Richardson and Brian Littrell of the Backstreet Boys. Both of them being from Kentucky, they make up 50% of the Backstreet Boys, and so many hits. One of the best-selling vocal groups, boy band groups of all time. We have one of Kevin Richardson's jackets, and we also have one of Brian Littrell's shirts and a pair of his shoes. And so a lot of history comes from Kentucky, and we encompass all types of music here at the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. Thanks for visiting with us here at the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. If you'd like to come down and see all the artifacts that we have in the museum for yourself, you can visit us 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. or you can check out our website at KentuckyMusicHallOfFame.com. We also have a Facebook page, an Instagram page, and we have several shows a week that you can see online as well. We'd like to thank you for taking this tour with us, and we hope to see you soon.